Enemy fleet in range, Colonel. They're closing fast. Colonel Adrian Hall stood rigidly at the command center, his eyes locked on the incoming tactical feed. The cold blue glow of the screens reflected across his face, highlighting the steely determination that had replaced the uncertainty of moments before. The Calixian fleet, enormous and intimidating, loomed on the horizon like a storm cloud. Their ships, dark and foreboding, advanced steadily towards Earth's last defensive line. "Status on the decoys?" Hall asked, not turning away from the screens. His voice was calm, but the weight of the moment pressed down on him like an iron fist. "L systems are green, Colonel," Lieutenant Walker replied, tapping his console. "The false signals are running as planned." "Good. Prepare for deployment," Hall ordered, his voice unwavering. He understood the gravity of the situation. Earth's forces were drastically outmatched. The Calixians had decimated entire star systems without breaking a sweat, and now they were at Earth's doorstep. But Hall was determined to give them a fight they hadn't prepared for. "Sir, are we sure about this? These decoys are our last option," Walker asked, his voice tinged with concern. Hall finally turned to face him. "Our last option is to survive. We won't win this with strength. We're playing their game, but on our terms." His gaze returned to the main display, showing the Calixian fleet's steady approach. "And when they underestimate us, we'll make them pay for it." Lieutenant Walker nodded, though his anxiety was evident. There was little faith in the decoys. The Calixians had crushed more advanced civilizations than Earth could fathom. They had the technology, the firepower, and the experience, but they hadn't counted on humanity's unwillingness to give up. "Deploy the decoys," Hall commanded. In the distance, Earth's last remaining fleet shifted into position, lining up to face the oncoming threat. The decoys, disguised as genuine military vessels, were released into space. Their engines powered up and sent out false signals, mimicking the ship signatures of Earth's largest warships. It was a calculated risk. One Hall knew could fail. But he wasn't left with many choices. The Calixian fleet continued its advance, ignoring the decoys at first, their sensors easily detecting the discrepancies. But Hall had anticipated their response. "Brace for impact," came a terse voice from the tactical officer. "They're locking onto the decoys." Hall's eyes narrowed, but he did not flinch. "Let them. We've already won half the battle." Seconds later, the Calixian ships launched their first barrage of missiles. The decoys erupted in clouds of smoke and fire, their shapes dissolving into debris. A familiar, deafening silence followed. The kind that always accompanied the beginning of a war. A silence before the storm. "Missile trajectories confirmed, Colonel," Walker said as the heads-up display blinked with urgent data. "They're targeting our main line. Activate the countermeasures, now." Hall's voice remained steady, but his mind raced. Earth had been preparing for this moment for months. Their arsenal was primitive compared to the Calixians' advanced weaponry, but Earth's military ingenuity had always been their greatest asset. They had invested every scrap of technology and human ingenuity into these defenses, making every shot count. "All countermeasures online," Walker reported, pressing a final series of commands. Suddenly, Earth's missiles streaked across the sky, spiraling outward in a series of well-placed, tightly coordinated arcs. Their flight paths were unpredictable, a series of erratic turns that would challenge even the Calixian fleet's advanced targeting systems. The missiles were designed not just to hit, but to confuse, to manipulate the alien sensors. The Calixian fleet's retaliatory fire split in all directions as they struggled to lock onto the shifting targets. But Hall knew this was just the opening move. He wasn't fighting for a decisive victory. He was fighting for survival, for a chance to push back. "Deploy the drones," Hall ordered. Walker hesitated for just a moment. "Are you sure? We only have a few left, Colonel." "Do it," Hall snapped, his voice cutting through the tension. "We need them to think we're more than we are." The drones, small and nimble, shot out from Earth's fleet, darting across the space battlefield. Each one carried a payload of virus codes, software designed to infiltrate Calixian systems and send them scrambling. The Calexians were technologically reliant, and if Hall could disrupt their communications and targeting systems, it would level the playing field. "Good luck, Earth," Hall muttered under his breath. "Good luck." As the drones moved deeper into the enemy formation, they deployed their payloads, sending malicious code into Calexian networks. Hall watched as the enemy fleet began to falter. Ships shifted in erratic patterns, their missile fire becoming less coordinated. A signal of success, a crack in their technological fortress. "We've hit them," Walker exclaimed, his voice tinged with surprise. "Their comms are scrambled. They're unable to coordinate." Hall allowed himself a brief nod. "Now we move." The Calexians, sensing something was wrong, attempted to regroup, but they were too late. Earth's remaining forces launched another wave of missiles, this time with calculated precision. Some were decoys, others were the real deal. As the Calexian fleet struggled to react, the missiles hit their mark, tearing through shields and rupturing hulls. The first casualty of the war. The Calexians would not have expected this. Earth had fought back. As the Calexians reeled from the unexpected blow, Colonel Hall's mind worked furiously. He wasn't naive enough to believe that this would be the end of it. The Calexians were persistent, methodical, and relentless in their conquest. But for the first time, they had encountered something they hadn't expected. They had encountered humanity's refusal to surrender. "Report," Hall barked as his officers worked at their stations. "We've inflicted significant damage to their flanks, Colonel, but their main fleet is still coming," the tactical officer responded, his face grim. "Then we make them pay for every step," Hall said coldly, his gaze once again fixed on the Calexian ships. "Prepare the next phase of the plan. We're just getting started." He knew there was no turning back. The battle had begun, and Earth had just shown the Calexian Empire that they could no longer take humanity's survival for granted. But Hall also knew the road ahead would be long, and the cost of this fight would be high. The Calexians would be back, and Earth would have to outthink them, outlast them, and, above all, survive. The first strike had been made. The war had begun. Pathetic. General Kalar stared at the tactical display, his lips curling into a disdainful sneer. The decoys, Earth's last line of defense, had been obliterated in a matter of seconds. The Calexian fleet's advanced targeting systems had easily locked onto the false signals, destroying them with overwhelming force. Yet Kalar was not concerned. This was simply an expected setback. Earth's feeble attempt to slow the inevitable only amused him. "General Keklar," his communications officer said, "the human fleet is still engaging with our forward units. Minor casualties, but no threat to the main force." "Let them waste their resources," Klar replied, dismissing the officer's report with a wave of his hand. "Their desperation only makes this easier. We will break them in the next hour." His tone was full of arrogance. Earth-shattering power was within his grasp, and Earth's resistance felt like a fleeting inconvenience. He believed that no species could withstand the Calexians' might. In his mind, the human defenses had already been crushed, and their will to fight had crumbled with the decoy ships. A low rumble echoed through the command deck as the fleet's forward units fired another salvo, destroying more of Earth's defenses. Klar stared at the display, his eyes narrowing with disdain. "Is this all they have to offer?" He grinned. Pathetic. Despite the destruction of the decoys, Klar's arrogance blinded him to a fundamental truth. Humanity was resourceful enough to survive. Meanwhile, on Earth's side, Colonel Adrian Hall wasn't fooled by the Calexians' arrogance. Though the decoys had been destroyed, they had served their purpose. The Calexians were convinced they were winning, and that blind certainty was exactly what Hall had hoped for. "Deploy the drones," Hall ordered calmly, turning to Lieutenant Walker. "They've underestimated us, and now we use it to our advantage." Walker hesitated for a moment, the tension in the room palpable. "Sir." "The drones are our last hope. If this doesn't work," Hall cut him off, "then we'll know it wasn't meant to be. But we will fight with every breath until the end." As the drones launched, Hall focused on the battle map, his mind already calculating the next steps. Each drone was a small but significant gamble, an attempt to infiltrate the Calixians' highly sophisticated communication network. If successful, it could throw the Calixians into disarray, disrupting their strategy and buying Earth's forces the precious time they needed. Begin the hack, Hall instructed as the first drone pierced the Calixian fleet's outer defenses. Inside the Calixian flagship, Keklar was oblivious to the impending infiltration. His mind was consumed with thoughts of victory, his fleet's superiority, and the crushing blow they would soon deliver. He looked down at the heads-up display, watching as Earth's defensive fire grew weaker. "No need for more theatrics," he muttered. "Prepare for the final strike. Let's finish this." Unbeknownst to him, a silent war had begun, one of code and deception. The Earth drones, small but agile, bypassed the Calexians' external firewalls with ease. They had been specifically designed for this purpose: fragile, but deadly efficient when deployed at the right moment. As the drones transmitted their payload into Calixian communications, their malicious code began to seep into the fleet's main systems, slowly scrambling the targeting algorithms and creating a cascade of errors within their command network. The first signs of chaos were subtle. An encrypted message failed to send, then a delay in the enemy's communications. By the time Klar realized what was happening, it was too late. "Commander," his communications officer shouted, his voice full of alarm. "The communication channels, they're corrupted. We're receiving false data from our own systems." Klar's expression hardened. "What are you saying?" he barked. "Sir, the Earth drones. They've infiltrated our networks. We're receiving conflicting reports. It's disrupting our fleet's coordination." Klar slammed his fist onto the console. The Calixian fleet, once perfectly synchronized, was now stumbling. Ships veered off course, missiles misfired, and targets were locked incorrectly. The once unassailable Calixian command structure was buckling under the weight of its own technological hubris. "How could this happen?" Clark demanded, his voice growing more agitated by the second. "General, it appears the humans, they anticipated this," his officer replied cautiously. "They must have known our reliance on technology would be our undoing." Klar's face twisted with rage. He had always prided himself on the invincibility of the Calexian Empire, on their technological superiority. The idea that Earth had outsmarted them, even for a moment, gnawed at his pride. "People cannot win with this," Klar muttered to himself. "They have nothing left." But Hall knew better. Earth's victories were not born from strength alone. They were crafted from clever tactics and the ability to think outside the confines of a conventional battle. The drones had created an opening, but Hall's true plan was much deeper. The Calixians had underestimated the resourcefulness of humanity, and that mistake was one they would pay for. "We've got them," Lieutenant Walker said, his voice low but with a hint of excitement. "The fleet is losing cohesion. We can move in for the kill." Paul didn't respond immediately. His mind was already ahead, analyzing the situation with a clinical detachment. "Not yet," he finally said. "We've only just begun to disrupt their systems. Let them dig their own grave. We'll make them think they've won before we strike again." The Calexians' fleet, once a well-oiled machine, was now a fragmented mess. Their ships fired erratically, and their command communication had become a jumble of conflicting orders. It was in this chaos that Hall saw his opportunity. The Calexians' arrogance had led them to believe their superior technology could never be challenged. But Earth had proven that even the mightiest can be cracked from within. "Deploy the next phase," Hall ordered, his voice steady. "Let's remind them who they're dealing with." As Earth's remaining forces moved in, Hall's eyes never left the battlefield. He knew this was just the beginning. The Calaxian Empire might have advanced technology, but they lacked something more important: adaptability. They had underestimated humanity. And now? The price for that arrogance would be steep. Meanwhile, Kalar, still reeling from the damage to his fleet, stared at the screens in disbelief. The Earth forces, once thought to be nothing more than a nuisance, had forced his hand. This was no longer a simple conquest. This was a war that could be lost. They've done something we didn't anticipate, Kalar growled, his voice tinged with frustration. But we will adapt, we always do. In the silence that followed, the battle raged on, but the Kealexians could no longer pretend that victory was certain. Earth's ingenuity had cracked their flawless veneer of invincibility, and Kalar knew that, for the first time, the outcome of this war was not as clear as it once had seemed. The Kealexian fleet, now divided and uncertain, was facing an enemy unlike any it had ever encountered, and in the heart of the chaos, Colonel Hall's calm determination was the only certainty. "Colonel, the Kealexian fleet is regrouping," Walker's voice broke through the stillness of the command center. Hall was staring at the heads-up display, watching the scattered Kealexian ships realign into a battle formation, a systematic response to the disarray caused by Earth's countermeasures. He didn't need to look to know that the aliens would not let their previous mistakes define them. The Kealexians had been forced to adapt, and if anything, their resolve would be stronger now. Their technological advantage was intact, but their belief in invincibility had cracked. "Deploy the second wave of drones," Hall said, his voice sharp. He paused for a moment before adding, "I want their flagship targeted. They can't hide behind their technology this time." Walker hesitated before confirming, his fingers moving rapidly over the controls. "Drones are launching now, Colonel." Hall's gaze remained fixed on the display. The enemy ships, once so methodical in their attack, were now showing signs of hesitation. The decoys had done their job, and Earth had scored its first victory, however small. But the real test was coming. He could feel the Kealexian fleet preparing for a much larger offensive. "Should we retreat, sir? The longer we wait, the more we risk," Major Dorn asked, his voice low, as if testing the waters. "The Kealexians have already proven they can overwhelm us if they choose." Hall exhaled slowly, a flicker of doubt passing through him, but only for a moment. He turned to face Dorn, his expression hardening. "We've been backed into a corner. If we retreat now, we lose everything. There's no turning back." Dorn nodded slowly, but Hall could see the worry in his eyes. The weight of the decision settled heavily in the room. The implications of this battle were beyond personal survival. They were about ensuring humanity's place in a galaxy that had never once considered their existence worth preserving. Hall turned back to the display, his mind working in overdrive. The Kealexian fleet was far from vulnerable. They were too smart to make the same mistake twice, but the cracks in their strategy were evident, and Hall knew exactly where to strike. His people, his crew, had no room for error. Every move had to be calculated, precise. The smallest misstep could lead to annihilation. He glanced at his tactical officers, all of them silently awaiting his command. "We have one shot at this. We'll set up an ambush, prepare our remaining ships to flank them from behind the asteroid belt." "Understood, sir," Walker said, quickly relaying the orders. Hall took a moment to look around the command center. The room was buzzing with activity, but there was an underlying tension in the air, one that had been growing ever since the Kealexians first entered the solar system. Hall could feel the pressure, the weight of every decision pressing down on him. He was responsible for every life on Earth that remained, for the future of humanity. His mind wandered back to the first time he'd been in command. How naive he'd been. He'd thought strategy was about perfect plans, about a seamless victory. The Kealexians had shown him that war wasn't about flawless execution. It was about survival. It was about adapting faster than your enemy. And above all, it was about exploiting every weakness, no matter how small. "Colonel," Dorn interrupted his thoughts. "We've got them. The drones are in position." Hall's eyes snapped back to the heads-up display. The drones had infiltrated Kealexian communications again, sending false data across their command network. He could see the confusion spreading through their fleet, their movements slowing. Some ships were starting to drift off course as they struggled to recalibrate. It wouldn't be long before their flagship realized that something was wrong. "The Kealexians won't be able to maintain their composure much longer," Hall muttered under his breath. "We'll strike when they're most vulnerable." Walker gave him a quick, determined nod. "Yes, sir." Hall surveyed the tactical map, mentally calculating the Kealexians' next move. They'd been caught off guard once, but this time they wouldn't fall for the same trap. He needed to keep them guessing, keep them unsure of where Earth's real strengths lay. As he stood there, a subtle wave of doubt passed over him. Was this enough? Were their defenses truly capable of withstanding a direct assault? Hall couldn't afford to second-guess himself. He had already made the decision to fight, and it had to be all or nothing. There were no easy choices left. The Calaxian fleet was tightening its formation, a sign that they were preparing for a retaliatory strike. Hall's heart rate quickened as he realized that the battle was about to escalate. His mind flashed through 100 scenarios, all of them ending in one of two ways: victory or defeat. "We're ready," Dorn said, breaking through his thoughts. "The ambush is set. All units in position." Hall nodded. "Wait for my signal." The Calaxian ships moved in, their formidable weapons pointing towards Earth's last line of defense. They were coming in hard, confident that the next strike would finish the job. But they were walking into a trap, one that Hall had meticulously planned. "Now," Hall ordered, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The trap was sprung. Earth's fleet, positioned behind the asteroid belt, emerged from their hiding spots. The Calaxian fleet was caught off guard, just as Hall had anticipated. Their sensors were still receiving corrupted data, and for just a moment, their focus faltered. Hall's orders were immediate. The fleet launched a coordinated counterattack, hitting the Calaxians from multiple directions. The first wave of missiles tore through their outer defenses, followed by Earth's remaining warships moving in for the kill. "Direct hit," Walker called out, excitement creeping into his voice. "We've breached their shields." Hall's pulse quickened, but he didn't allow himself to feel relief. This was only the first step. The Calaxian flagship was still operational, and its weapons were powerful enough to wipe out the entire fleet in a single strike. They had to move quickly before they could regroup. "Keep the pressure on them," Hall barked. "Don't let up. This ends today." The Calaxians began to retaliate, their ships firing back in anger, but Earth's tactical strikes were hitting their mark. The Calaxians were in disarray, their once invincible command structure slowly crumbling under the weight of their own confusion. As Hall watched the chaos unfold on the screen, he felt a rare flicker of hope. Earth was fighting back. Not with superior technology, but with cunning. With every resource they had left. "Colonel," Dorn said, his voice full of disbelief. "We've got them on the ropes. They're losing ground." Hall remained calm, his eyes locked on the Calaxian flagship, which was still intact. They hadn't won yet. The battle was far from over. "Not yet," Hall muttered. "Keep pushing. We're not finished until they're down for good." The standoff continued. The battle was far from won, but Hall could see a path ahead. The Calaxian arrogance had been their greatest weakness, and humanity's ingenuity was proving to be their greatest strength. The Calaxian fleet was closing in, its massive ships emerging from the debris field and locking into their final formation. Colonel Adrian Hall watched the heads-up display with narrowed eyes, his grip tightening on the command chair. The Calaxian ships were advancing with cold precision, like a wolf stalking its prey. Hall could feel the mounting pressure, but there was no time for hesitation. Earth's forces were spread thin and every moment counted. This was the critical point in the battle. The moment when either Earth would survive, or it would be lost. "Colonel, they're preparing to launch their main assault." Lieutenant Walker's voice was strained, laced with urgency. "All remaining ships are lining up. This is it." Hall's thoughts raced. The Calaxians had learned from their mistakes. They were no longer vulnerable to Earth's initial tactics. The element of surprise was gone. But humanity still had one advantage: its ability to adapt quickly and think outside the box. And Hall wasn't about to let their superior technology dictate the outcome of this war. "Ready the sabotage teams," Hall ordered. "Target their communication lines. We need to create chaos in their ranks." Walker's fingers moved rapidly over the controls. "Sabotage teams in position, Colonel. We're ready to deploy." The tension in the command center thickened, and Hall could feel the weight of each decision pressing on him. This wasn't just about strategy anymore. It was about survival. He had already made up his mind that if they were going to lose, they would make the Calaxians feel every inch of that defeat. "Send the signal," Hall commanded. Within seconds, the first wave of drones launched. Tiny, seemingly insignificant devices that would slip past the Calexian defenses unnoticed. Each one was equipped with a virus, an intricate program designed to breach the Calexian communication network and inject false data. They were small but highly effective, and their success depended on complete stealth. Hall's eyes remained fixed on the display, the map of the Calexian fleet filling the screen. The drones maneuvered silently through the void, their destinations already mapped out. They had only one job: create confusion, break down the Calexian communications systems. It was a gamble, but it was their best shot. "Target locked," Walker said, his voice tight with focus. "The first drone has infiltrated their outer firewall. It's in." Hall didn't respond immediately, watching intently as the digital countdown appeared on his screen. He could feel the pressure building, each second stretching longer than the last. The fate of the human race was tied to these next few moments. The first wave of drone attacks hit Calexian communication lines, sending cascading errors through their system. A ripple effect spread across the fleet, confusion setting in like wildfire. Messages were delayed, signals scrambled, and the Calexian fleet's cohesion began to fracture. Hall could see the disarray in real time on his laser plasma display. "Sir, their communication lines are failing," Walker reported, his eyes wide with disbelief. "They've lost contact with their rear ships. We've created a breach in their chain of command." The Calexian fleet, once flawless in its execution, was now stumbling. Orders were being sent to the wrong ships. Defensive maneuvers were delayed. The flagship, once the heart of the Calexian assault, now appeared to be struggling to maintain control over the fleet. The smug confidence that had dominated Clar's forces was beginning to crumble. "Hold steady," Hall muttered, not allowing himself to feel the rush of victory just yet. "This isn't over." "Colonel, they're starting to panic," Dorn said, glancing at his own display. "Some of their ships are pulling back. They don't know what to do." Hall nodded slowly. The Calexian arrogance, the belief that their technology made them unbeatable, was finally being tested, and so far they were failing. "Give them no room to regroup," Hall ordered. "Launch the second wave of sabotage." Another set of drones was released, this time targeting the Calexian fleet's defensive shields. Hall knew that if they could disrupt their energy systems, it would be enough to create chaos in the Calexian ranks. It wasn't about destroying their fleet. It was about breaking their will. "Targeting systems compromised," Walker confirmed. "We've infiltrated their defensive matrix. The Calexians won't be able to defend against our next wave." The fleet's chaotic movements became more pronounced. Hall watched as one of the Calexian ships veered off course, colliding with another in a disjointed collision that sent shockwaves through their ranks. The Calexians were losing control of the battlefield, their once imposing presence now reduced to a scrambling force, trying to recover from the unexpected chaos. "Now's our chance," Hall said, standing up from his chair. "All units, prepare for full offensive. This is the moment we make them regret underestimating us." The next wave of human ships engaged the Calexians with ferocity, exploiting the gaps in their defenses. Missiles launched from Earth's remaining fleet, striking the now vulnerable Calexian vessels. There was no mercy in this attack. This wasn't about victory. It was about survival, and Hall wasn't going to let them back down. "Colonel, they're retreating," Dorn called out, his voice barely containing the surprise. "The Calexians are pulling back. They've lost command." Hall didn't celebrate. He knew the Calexians weren't done yet. "Hold positions," he ordered. "We're not finished. They'll regroup soon, and we need to be ready." The Calexian fleet's confusion was now their greatest weakness. The true scale of the sabotage had only just begun to unfold, and the cracks in their once unbreakable communication systems were starting to show. The Calexians had been overconfident. They had relied too much on their technological superiority and had underestimated the one thing they could never replicate: humanity's will to survive. "They're retreating to their flagship," Walker reported. "They're trying to consolidate their forces." "Good," Hall said, his expression hardening. "We've got them on the run. Keep the pressure on." As the battle raged on, Hall watched the Calexian fleet pull further and further back, their arrogance slowly replaced with doubt. The first signs of human ingenuity had begun to disrupt the Calexians' overconfidence. The Calexians, for the first time in this war, were losing control. The Calexians had learned the hard way that technology could only take them so far, and humanity, against all odds, was proving that survival wasn't about technology. It was about adaptability, grit, and the ability to exploit every weakness, no matter how small. The Calexians would retreat, but this was just the beginning. Hall knew there was no guarantee of success yet, but for the first time he allowed himself to believe that victory was possible. The turning point had arrived. The Calexian fleet was in disarray. After the catastrophic loss of their flagship and the fragmentation of their command structure, Colonel Hall knew that their once unshakable confidence was starting to crack. Their previous tactics, once flawless, now seemed erratic, their movements more hesitant. The shift in the Calexian strategy was subtle at first, but unmistakable. Hall could feel it. Their arrogance had given way to uncertainty. This was the psychological battle, the war of attrition where human ingenuity had finally begun to eat away at the heart of the Chalesian Empire. "Sir, we've detected a shift in their formations," Lieutenant Walker said, his voice tight with unease. "They're pulling back again, but it's not coordinated. Their ships aren't responding as they should. Some of them are hesitating." Paul kept his eyes fixed on the heads-up display in front of him, tracking the erratic movements of the Calexian ships. The once pristine organization of the fleet was now marred by signs of doubt. He knew this wasn't a simple retreat. The Calexians were no longer certain of their superiority. Their confidence had been shattered by Earth's unexpected resilience. "They're questioning their strategy," Hall said quietly, almost to himself. "They don't know how to respond. That's good. We'll exploit it." The Calexian fleet had once been a symbol of ruthless efficiency, but now Hall saw cracks forming in their impenetrable shell. The chaotic retreat they were attempting now was not a sign of victory, but of internal collapse. "All units, maintain pressure," Hall commanded, his voice calm but sharp. "We push them further into uncertainty." Walker looked back at him, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden change in momentum. "Should we press for a decisive strike now? Their flagship is still intact, and the remaining ships are spread thin." Hall glanced over at the display showing the disjointed movements of the Calexians. "No, not yet. We're playing the long game now. We make them question everything. Every move they make from here on out will be guided by doubt." The tactical room was charged with a new energy. The battle had turned into something more than just ships firing on one another. This was a test of will, and the Calexians were faltering. Pilar, the Calexian general, was far from oblivious to the growing weakness within his ranks. Hall knew this. It wasn't just the external pressure that was causing their disarray. It was internal. Pilar's reliance on technology had always been their greatest asset, but now it was a liability. Earth had struck at the core of that reliance, and now, Pilar was scrambling to piece together a strategy that made sense. In the Calexian command center, Pilar seethed as he watched his fleet falter. His hands clenched into fists as reports flooded in, contradicting each other, orders arriving late, and some ships not responding at all. "We've lost control of the fleet," one of his officers reported, his voice shaking with disbelief. "The communications are being scrambled again. Our signals—" "Damn it," Pilar snapped, cutting him off. "How is this possible? We've dealt with primitive species before. Why are these humans different?" "Sir, it's the sabotage," another officer chimed in, his voice more composed but still showing signs of panic. "Their drones have been interfering with our communications and targeting systems. They're turning our own technology against us." Pilar slammed his fist on the control panel. "I know that," he growled, "but how could they have anticipated this? No species should be able to break through our defenses so easily." Claire's arrogance was cracking. His fleet was no longer the finely tuned machine it had been. The very systems that had once given them control were now betraying them. The Calexians were losing their nerve, and their unity was splintering. Back in Earth's command center, Hall could sense the shift. Every tactical move made by the Calexians was now laced with hesitation. They were questioning each order, each command. Hall's voice remained steady as he issued the next orders. Target their rear units, he said, leaning over the console, eyes focused on the heads-up display. We need to isolate the ships that are faltering, make them feel even more exposed. As Earth's forces moved in to execute Hall's orders, Walker glanced over at him. Colonel, are we sure they're this weak? They've still got firepower. If we go too far, they might regroup and hit back harder. Hall shook his head slightly. No, they've lost their advantage. This isn't about overpowering them. It's about breaking their spirit. If they see weakness in their own ranks, they'll fall apart. Understood, sir. The next series of strikes were surgical. Earth's forces targeted the most vulnerable Calixian ships, the ones that had failed to respond to commands, the ones that seemed to hesitate. Each strike was aimed at causing further confusion, further isolation. The Calixian fleet, once so unified, was now fractured. Each ship fighting a battle not just against Earth, but against its own crumbling systems. Report, Lieutenant, Hall said, his voice steady as always. They're retreating further, Colonel, Walker said, his eyes wide. More ships are breaking off. We've got them on the run. Hall didn't allow himself to feel satisfaction. The Calixians were retreating, yes, but they were not done yet. The final confrontation was still to come. In the Calixian command center, Kakar was beside himself. The fragmented reports, the broken communication, the loss of control. It was too much. He could feel his grip on the situation slipping, and that was something he could not afford. We need to regroup, reinforce the units on the left flank, Kalar ordered, trying to maintain control. But even as he spoke, his officers were uncertain. They didn't look at him with the same unwavering loyalty they once had. Doubt had crept into their eyes. Their confidence had been shattered. We need to get to the backup command center, one officer suggested quietly, hesitantly. The current systems are compromised. Klar shot him a look that could have killed, but the officer didn't flinch. The Calixians were losing their edge, and Klar knew it. His own people no longer trusted their own systems, and it was clear that Earth was playing a different kind of game now. Back on Earth, Hall observed the growing signs of retreat, but he also knew that it wasn't time to celebrate. The Calixians weren't done yet. They still had the firepower to strike back. But the damage had been done, their unity had been shattered, and their belief in their own superiority was faltering. The psychological war was reaching its peak. We push forward, Hall said, turning to his officers. We use their own paranoia against them. The tension in the command center was thick as Earth's forces prepared for the next move. They had turned the tide, not just with technology, but with the power of doubt. The Calixians had lost their trust in their own systems, in their own leadership, and that was something Hall would not let them recover from. The first battle was over, but the war was far from won. However, one thing was clear: the Calixians had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. Hall's eyes never left the heads-up display. The Calixian fleet was in chaos. Fragments of once mighty ships scattered across the battlefield. Their command systems were collapsing, their pride was shattered, and now it was time to end this war. For the first time, Hall allowed himself to feel the weight of their collective efforts. The stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just another battle. It was humanity's final chance to break the Calixian Empire once and for all. Sir, they're still reeling, Walker reported, voice steady but with a sense of disbelief. The flagship's communication systems are down. They've lost most of their fleet's coordination. Good, Hall replied without looking up. But don't expect them to stay down. Klar won't give up that easily. The Calixian fleet had been dealt a staggering blow. Their technological advantage was all but neutralized, and their strategic confidence had been broken. Hall could see it now. Their arrogance was a thing of the past. They were scrambling, unsure of their next move, trying to regain control. They were vulnerable. Colonel, Major Dorn spoke up. The Calixians are trying to regroup. But they're all over the place. Their rear units are retreating, and the flagship is trying to fall back. Let them, Hall said, his voice cold. We don't need to chase them. We need to finish this once and for all. All units, prepare the final strike. I want every asset we have on this mission. We'll hit them where it hurts. Hall's mind worked quickly, calculating the path forward. This was their one shot. If they failed now, the Calixians would regroup and strike back with everything they had. But with their systems weakened and their command network broken, Earth's forces had an opening. They had to act fast, or risk losing everything. He stood, walking across the command center, giving each officer a quick glance as he passed. Their eyes were focused, determined, but Hall could see the weight in their expressions. They knew the risks. They knew this was their last chance. Deploy the drones, Hall ordered, turning back to the central display. We've already weakened their networks, now we finish what we started. The drones launched with purpose, small but carrying the weight of humanity's last hope. They were the last wave of sabotage, designed to breach the heart of the Calixian fleet's command center. Hall had spent days meticulously planning this attack. It wasn't just about defeating the Calixians physically, it was about completely erasing their ability to fight back. The drones pierced through the Calixian defense grid with swift, precise movements. Each one carried a powerful virus, capable of infiltrating the Calixian fleet's core systems. Hall could see it happening in real time on the heads-up display. Each drone sent a signal, and each one found its mark. The Calixian ships began to falter again, their systems failing one by one. It was like watching the fall of an empire in slow motion. First wave of drones in position, Walker said, his eyes flicking over the data. They're receiving the payload. Systems are crashing. Good. Push harder, Hall urged, his voice firm. We've got them now. The Calixian fleet, once so formidable, was now a shadow of its former self. Their flagship, still trying to assert control, was now isolated, unable to communicate effectively with the remaining ships. Hall could see the confusion spreading through their ranks. They were disorganized, unsure of their own capabilities. This was the moment Earth had been waiting for, when the Calixians, overwhelmed by their own failures, would finally break. Hall turned back to Dorn, who was watching the data streams with intense focus. They won't give up without a fight, Dorn said, his voice quiet. Are we sure we can finish this? We don't have a choice, Hall replied. His gaze hardened. This is our final gambit. We hit them now, and we hit them hard. Their technology is failing them. We use that against them. Hall's command was carried out swiftly. The remaining ships in Earth's fleet were now in position, moving into the final stages of the attack. The Calixian ships, their systems in disarray, were vulnerable. The time to act was now. The final strike would not just cripple their fleet. It would shatter their confidence completely. Full offensive, Hall said. We strike at the core. We end this now. The last wave of missiles launched from Earth's fleet, cutting through space with deadly accuracy. This wasn't just another bombardment. It was a calculated, decisive strike at the Calixian flagship's heart. Hall watched the data as it streamed across his display. The Calixians were completely unprepared. Their shields, already weakened by the earlier sabotage, failed to protect them. One by one, their defensive systems collapsed. Direct hit, Walker said, his voice steady but filled with awe. The flagship's down. They're losing control. The remaining fleet is in complete disarray. Hall felt the tension start to ease, but only slightly. The Calixian flagship was no longer a threat. But their remaining ships still had the power to cause damage. Earth's forces couldn't afford to stop now. Continue the assault, Hall ordered. We push them until they're completely finished. The Calixian ships, no longer able to maintain any coherent formation, began to break apart. Earth's fleet moved in, striking with ruthless efficiency. Each missile, each targeted strike hammered home the message. Humanity would not be wiped out. The Calixians had miscalculated. They had underestimated Earth. And now they would pay the price. We've won, Colonel, Dorn said quietly, looking over the data. Their fleet is in retreat. The flagship is destroyed. They've got nothing left. Hall didn't speak for a moment. His eyes remained fixed on the display, watching the Calixian fleet scatter. They were beaten, but the victory was bittersweet. The price of survival had been steep. And while the Calexians' arrogance had finally been shattered, the cost of humanity's resistance had been immense. "Prepare for the next phase," Hall finally said, his voice steady though his mind was already on the future. "We'll rebuild, but we'll never forget what it took to get here." Earth had won, not just by strength, but by resilience, by adaptability. The Calexians had relied too heavily on their technological superiority, and Earth had turned that against them. The final gambit had succeeded, and the Calexian Empire had collapsed under the weight of its own hubris. Hall allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but only for a moment. The war was over, but the future would be shaped by the choices made today. The heads-up display showed the wreckage of the Calexian fleet drifting silently in the cold void of space. Their once mighty ships, broken and scattered, floated lifelessly, a symbol of the Empire's downfall. Earth's victory was clear, but the weight of that victory pressed heavily on Colonel Hall's shoulders. The battlefield was quiet now, but in the stillness Hall could hear the hum of his own thoughts, the echoes of the cost of the war that had just ended. He stood alone in the command center, watching the final reports come in. The Calexian forces had been shattered. Their flagship, the symbol of their dominance, had been destroyed. The rest of their fleet had retreated, their cohesion dissolved, their resolve shattered. But Earth had not emerged unscathed. For all the strategic brilliance and human ingenuity that had won the day, the toll on Earth's forces had been immense. Hundreds of ships had been lost. Thousands of lives had been sacrificed. "Colonel," Major Dorn's voice interrupted his thoughts. "The last Calexian ships are retreating. The fleet is almost entirely disabled. Their remaining forces are scattered." Hall didn't respond immediately. He had expected this, but now that it was reality, it didn't feel like a victory. The cost was too high, the consequences too uncertain. Earth had won the battle, but what did it mean in the long run? "Take a moment," Hall said quietly, turning to face Dorn. "Then prepare the damage reports. We need to rebuild." Dorn nodded, his face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. He turned to leave, but Hall's gaze remained fixed on the display. The Calexian fleet was a shadow of its former self, and the galaxy was now a different place. Earth had fought back, and against all odds, had driven the invaders away. But what came next? The silence of the room was broken by the voice of Lieutenant Walker, who approached with a cautious expression. "Colonel, I have the final tally. We've lost 40% of our fleet, and over 25,000 casualties." The numbers hit Hall like a punch to the gut. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the losses settle in. The victory had come at a staggering price. "I know," Hall muttered, his voice heavy. "We all knew this wasn't going to be easy. We knew what we were fighting for. But—" He trailed off, not knowing how to finish the sentence. How could anyone put into words the pain of watching so many lives slip away, of knowing that every tactical decision had come with a cost? The survivors had fought with everything they had. They had given their lives, their families, their future for the chance to survive. And now, with the war won, what would they return to? Would they rebuild? Or would they be forever haunted by the ghosts of their sacrifices? "Colonel," Walker began again, his tone softer now, "what happens now?" Hall turned to face him, trying to find the right words. "We rebuild," he said finally, his voice steady despite the weight of it all. "We rebuild, and we prepare. This war might be over, but the cost of it will be with us forever. We can't let that go to waste." Walker nodded, understanding the weight of Hall's words. The battle was over, but the future remained uncertain. There was still much to do, and rebuilding would take time, perhaps even generations. But Earth had won. They had survived. That was something worth holding on to. Over the next few hours, Hall and his team reviewed the reports, taking stock of the damage and the casualties. Each number was a reminder of the cost. The Calexian fleet was no longer a threat, but the consequences of their actions would linger for years to come. Earth had emerged victorious, but the true fight had only just begun. The rebuilding process would require more than just physical resources. It would require emotional and psychological strength. Hall walked through the command center, his eyes meeting the tired faces of his officers. They had done the impossible. They had held their ground against an empire that had swept across the galaxy, and now they stood as the defenders of Earth. But there was no joy in it. Only exhaustion. "Major Dorn, get in touch with the remaining fleets," Hall ordered. "We need to coordinate a plan for securing our borders. Make sure the civilian sectors are accounted for. I want to ensure we've got full control over our systems before we move on to rebuilding." "Understood, Colonel," Dorn replied, his voice firm despite the fatigue. Hall turned his attention to the larger map of Earth's territory where the fight was far from over. The Calixians had been driven out, but the scars they left behind would remain for years. The human race would have to confront not only the physical aftermath, but also the mental toll of the war. The emotional wounds ran deep, and many of his officers, including himself, would have to come to terms with the costs of what had been sacrificed. "Lieutenant Walker," Hall called, his tone quieter now, "I need you to begin the assessment of Earth's defense systems. It's not enough to defeat an enemy, we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Walker didn't respond immediately, but his understanding was evident. The war had shown Earth's resilience, but it had also shown how vulnerable they were. The Calixians were just one threat, and Hall knew there would be others. Earth could never afford to be complacent again. Hall's mind wandered briefly to the families of the fallen. He thought of the soldiers, the pilots, the officers who had fought beside him and given everything for Earth's survival. They had made the ultimate sacrifice, and in their memory Hall knew that he couldn't rest. He couldn't allow this victory to be hollow. It had to mean something. "I'm going to check in with the survivors," Hall said, turning toward the door. "Make sure they're getting the support they need." Walker nodded silently, and Dorn gave him a look that spoke volumes. They understood the weight Hall carried. They had all sacrificed something. But, as Earth's last line of defense, they had fought and won. The enemy was gone, but the real work was just beginning. As Hall walked out of the command center, he couldn't help but think of the future. The victory was theirs, but the road ahead would be long. The cost had been great, but Earth had proven it could survive, rebuild, and endure. The Calixian fleet was gone, but humanity's strength, its willingness to fight, to sacrifice, and to rebuild, was something that no enemy could take away. And that, for Hall, was the one thing worth holding on to as they began the long process of healing and moving forward. The stillness of space stretched beyond Earth's borders, an eerie silence that contrasted with the roar of battle only days before. The war was over. The Calixian fleet was scattered, their once imposing presence reduced to a shadow in the cosmic expanse. Earth had survived. Earth had stood before the observation window, the flickering lights of the command center behind him, a stark reminder of the cost of victory. The view outside was calm now, the debris from the battle slowly drifting into the emptiness, but inside a storm was brewing. He had led them through the storm, but the consequences of this war would ripple for generations. Hall couldn't shake the weight of it all. The cost of the lives lost, the destruction that Earth had endured, the sacrifices made for the chance at survival. Even though the Calixians had been defeated, the true test was just beginning. The rebuilding of Earth wasn't just about infrastructure. It was about restoring hope, rebuilding the human spirit that had been bruised and battered throughout the conflict. "Colonel?" Major Dorn's voice broke through his thoughts. "It's time." Hall turned, meeting Dorn's gaze. "Yes, let's begin." The transition had already started. Earth was no longer the underdog, no longer the vulnerable planet on the edge of the galaxy, overlooked and underestimated by the rest of the universe. The final victory over the Calixians had reshaped the galaxy's perception of humanity. The first steps toward diplomatic talks had been initiated, with emissaries sent out to other planets to ensure that Earth's new place in the galactic order was solidified. But there was still much to do, and Hall knew it. The war had left scars that would not heal overnight. Hall met with his leadership team, each one a symbol of the new era. They were all tired. Tired of the fighting, of the endless decisions, the toll that had been taken. But as he looked around the room, he could see the same fire in their eyes. They had done the impossible. They had driven back an empire that thought they could crush Earth like a bug underfoot. "We've made it," Hall said, his voice firm. He didn't need to say much more. His team already knew the truth. They'd made it, but at a price. "Yes, sir," Walker replied. "But now comes the real challenge, rebuilding our defenses, our alliances, restoring what was lost." Hall nodded, his expression somber. "We'll need more than just weapons. We need trust. We need to rebuild not only our military strength, but our strength as a species. We've shown the galaxy what we're capable of, but now we need to show them what we stand for. Peace isn't a gift. It's something we'll have to earn." The room fell silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The damage had been done, but Earth had endured, and that endurance was something the galaxy would never forget. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to define their place in the galaxy, to show that they would not simply be victims of greater forces. The Calixians had underestimated them, and that would be their downfall. "Colonel," Dorn said, breaking the silence, "we've already begun rebuilding our alliances with the Zerani and other races. They've offered support for the long road ahead." Hall smiled faintly, the first glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's a start. But there's a long way to go. The Calixians may be defeated, but others will rise. We can't afford to relax." "We won't," Walker said firmly. "We've learned what we're capable of. The galaxy now knows what Earth can do." "Exactly," Hall agreed. "This isn't just about defeating an empire. It's about showing the galaxy that humanity is here to stay. We'll rebuild what's been destroyed, not just with weapons, but with resolve. Our strength isn't just in our weapons, it's in our will." The Calixians learned that the hard way. The conversation shifted as the team began to plan the next steps. Earth's victory was not an end, but a beginning. The rebuilding would take time, and it would take more than technology or diplomacy. It would take a new spirit. A spirit of unity, resilience, and above all, purpose. Earth had survived, but it could not forget the lessons of the past. In the distance, the first steps of Earth's new diplomacy were taking shape. The human race was no longer the victim, no longer the weak planet at the mercy of a ruthless empire. Earth had proven that it could stand its ground, that it could fight back and win. And now it would use that strength to build something better, something that could stand the test of time. Hall walked away from the meeting, his thoughts heavy but clear. He knew the cost of victory. He knew that peace would not come easily. But humanity had done the impossible, and they would do it again if they had to. They had faced the unimaginable and come out victorious. And now they had to prove that they were worthy of that victory. The light from the rising sun reflected in the observation window, casting long shadows across the command center. The new era was beginning, but there was still much to be done. Hall could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do, but the real work was only starting. "Colonel," Walker called as Hall approached the door, "what's next?" Hall paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Next? We lead. We make sure that what happened to us never happens again. We build a future. Together. A future where Earth is not just a survivor, but a leader. A place of strength, where others know that they will be judged, not by their power, but by their will to do what's right." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Hall's words settling over them. They had won, yes, but there was still a long road ahead, and it was a road they would walk together. As Hall looked out at the rising sun, he saw not just the end of one war, but the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. A chapter that would be written with the blood, sweat, and sacrifice of those who had fought to preserve what mattered most. The war was over, but the journey had just begun, and this time humanity would shape its destiny. The galaxy would know what Earth stood for, and no empire, Calixian or otherwise, would ever forget it. If you've enjoyed this journey through humanity's fight for survival, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic tales of resilience and triumph. Comment below with your thoughts on humanity's victory and what you believe the future holds.